On the evening of September 14, 2010, the life of Pastor Henry Williams changed forever. His 19-year-old daughter, Ashley, a promising student at the University of Memphis and a devoted member of the New Hope Church, failed to return home as expected. Henry and his wife, Linda, initially assumed she had lost track of time, perhaps caught up in studying or a church activity. However, as the night stretched on and their calls went unanswered, their worry deepened into a gnawing fear. By morning, their concern had escalated into desperation. Linda contacted Ashley's friends, none of whom had seen her since the previous afternoon. Henry reached out to the campus security office, who reported no signs of Ashley on university grounds. With rising anxiety, they turned to the Memphis Police Department, filing a missing persons report. Officers launched an immediate search, combing through Ashley's regular routes and reviewing surveillance footage from nearby businesses and campus facilities. It was on the afternoon of September 15 that the worst possible news reached the Williams family. Ashley's lifeless body was discovered in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The scene was grim, with signs of prolonged suffering and violence. Investigators found conclusive evidence indicating she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The brutality of the crime shocked even seasoned detectives. DNA evidence and security camera footage from nearby streets provided crucial leads that pointed directly to three suspects: Justin Carter, Mark Henderson, and Kevin Lee, college students from affluent Memphis families. The arrests came swiftly, bringing a temporary sense of relief to the Williams family and the community. However, the relief soon turned into frustration and despair as the legal proceedings unfolded. The evidence against the perpetrators was overwhelming. Ashley's DNA was found on their clothing, and surveillance footage placed them near the warehouse at the time of the crime. Witness testimonies further corroborated their involvement. Yet, the courtroom became a battleground where the defense leveraged the defendants' privileged backgrounds. The legal team, funded by the suspects' wealthy parents, painted them as misguided young men with bright futures who had made a terrible mistake. Despite the undeniable nature of their crimes, the court system showed leniency. The judge, under pressure from influential figures and presented with a narrative of rehabilitation potential, sentenced each of the young men to a mere 12 years in prison. Good behavior could see them walk free in as little as 8 years. The verdict sent shockwaves through the Williams family, the church congregation, and the wider Memphis community. It felt like a mockery of justice, a slap in the face to those who believed in moral accountability. For Henry Williams, the sentencing was an unbearable betrayal. He had always believed in the power of faith and the integrity of the justice system. But in that moment, he realized that in a world dictated by money and influence, true justice was a fleeting illusion. Linda, shattered by grief, withdrew from the world, spending her days in silence, clutching Ashley's photographs. Meanwhile, Henry found himself wrestling with conflicting emotions: rage, despair, and a growing resolve. In the months that followed, he prayed relentlessly, seeking divine answers to his torment. But as he watched the perpetrators' families continue their lives unaffected, enjoying their wealth and power, a dark realization took hold within him. The courts had failed his daughter. The system had failed his family. If justice would not come through lawful means, he would have to seek it himself. Henry's once unwavering faith in the principles of forgiveness began to waver. The sermons he delivered to his congregation felt hollow. His outward demeanor remained composed, offering comfort and strength to those who sought it, but beneath the surface, a storm raged. He meticulously followed every development in the prison system, tracking the progress of Justin, Mark, and Kevin's sentences. Their release dates were marked in his mind with precision. Day by day, his grief hardened into something sharper, something with purpose. Henry's thoughts turned toward justice of a different kind, a justice that could not be swayed by wealth or influence. He spent nights alone in his study, poring over law books, criminal case studies, and forensic techniques. The man who once preached forgiveness and redemption now found himself contemplating vengeance. The tragedy that had befallen his family had changed him in ways he could no longer ignore. What once felt unthinkable now seemed inevitable. Pastor Henry began preparing for revenge immediately after the sentencing. Outwardly, nothing about him changed. He continued to deliver sermons about love, forgiveness, and redemption. To his congregation, he remained the same compassionate spiritual leader, offering solace and guidance to those in need. However, beneath this carefully maintained facade, darkness took root and grew. Each smile he offered, each prayer he led, masked the seething anger and relentless determination simmering within him. Between 2011 and 2015, Henry immersed himself in the study of forensic science, toxicology, and ballistics. He spent countless late nights poring over books, online journals, and crime documentaries, absorbing knowledge about investigative loopholes and forensic blind spots. He meticulously analyzed case studies of unsolved crimes, learning how perpetrators evaded justice and how law enforcement's limitations could be exploited. Every discovery fueled his obsession, sharpening his focus and solidifying his resolve. His pursuit of knowledge was methodical and relentless. He sought out individuals who had first-hand experience with the justice system, former inmates, disgraced law enforcement officers, and even private investigators. Posing as a prison outreach advocate, Henry earned the trust of these individuals, carefully extracting insights into law enforcement protocols, interrogation techniques, and the vulnerabilities of the prison system. In hushed conversations over coffee and late-night phone calls, he gathered a trove of information about how to avoid detection, destroy evidence, and create airtight alibis. Under the guise of mission work, Henry began regular visits to the state correctional facility where his daughter's killers were incarcerated. He preached to the inmates about salvation and second chances, gaining the favor of prison officials and chaplains. But his true purpose was far more sinister. Observing the routines and habits of the three men who had destroyed his life, Henry took note of their daily activities, behavioral patterns, and interactions with other prisoners. He watched how they responded to authority, their alliances within the prison walls, and their weaknesses. He maintained a journal where he recorded every detail, what time they exercised, which guards were friendly with them, and how often they received visitors. By 2016, Henry decided he needed to take his preparation to another level. He enrolled in a self-defense and security training program under the pretense of wanting to better protect his church and community. Through this, he gained proficiency in handling firearms, close-quarters combat, and evasive driving techniques. He attended firearms training courses, where he learned to fire with precision and studied the mechanics of various weapons. Each lesson was not just about self-defense, it was about planning for the future. Henry purchased and registered a firearm legally, keeping it hidden under layers of deception, ensuring that no one suspected his true intentions. His transformation extended beyond physical skills. Henry carefully monitored his financial transactions, ensuring that any purchases related to his plan were untraceable. He began using cash for every suspicious expense, avoided using his home computer for research, and utilized public libraries and internet cafes to cover his digital trail. He knew that patience was key, revenge could not be rushed. As the years passed, Henry perfected the art of concealment. He developed a routine that left no room for suspicion, balancing his pastoral duties with his secret preparations. He continued to lead community events, organize charity drives, and counsel troubled youth, all while nurturing the storm that raged within him. He kept his emotions buried beneath layers of composed faith, ensuring that no one, not even his closest friends, would suspect the darkness lurking beneath his surface. His wife, Linda, buried herself in grief, withdrawing from the outside world. Henry let her mourn in silence, never revealing the thoughts that consumed him. He played the role of the grieving father, yet behind closed doors, he meticulously assembled the pieces of his plan, refining each element with surgical precision. He researched everything from poisons that left no trace in autopsies to methods of staging accidents that would appear entirely natural. He understood that the key to a successful plan was time and patience. He knew that justice would not come quickly. He had to wait for the day when those men would step out of their prison cells, free and unburdened, believing that they had escaped their sins. Henry knew they would walk out with smiles on their faces, thinking their wealthy families had shielded them from real consequences. That thought alone kept him going through the sleepless nights and the gnawing pain of loss. Every action he took was calculated, every step measured. Henry envisioned the moment of retribution not with reckless rage, but with cold, methodical precision. He was not a man driven by impulse, he was a man with a plan, a man who had been forced to take justice into his own hands. He rehearsed every possibility in his mind, leaving no detail unchecked, no variable unaccounted for. The day of their release loomed closer, and with it, the anticipation of Henry's final act of justice. They believed they had moved on, but Henry knew better. He would wait, just as he had waited all these years, biding his time until the moment was right. Revenge, he knew, was not something to be rushed. It was something to be perfected. In 2022, after serving their sentences, Justin, Mark, and Kevin walked out of prison, their freedom restored. They returned to Memphis, stepping back into a world that seemed to have moved on without them. Their wealthy families had paved the way for their reintegration, ensuring that their criminal pasts were nothing more than a footnote in their otherwise privileged lives. With their records quietly expunged from the public eye and their reputations carefully reconstructed, they slipped back into society with ease. Their families arranged for them to have comfortable jobs and well-established businesses, generous trust funds, and luxurious homes in upscale neighborhoods. Any whispers of their involvement in Ashley's death were buried under layers of influence and wealth. Within months, they were attending social events, rubbing shoulders with Memphis's elite, and presenting themselves as reformed young men ready to contribute to society. The same people who once mourned Ashley's loss now greeted them with polite smiles and firm handshakes, as if her murder had been a distant tragedy, long forgotten. Henry watched from a distance as they celebrated their new beginnings. He saw them enjoying their freedom, laughing, dining in high-end restaurants, and hosting parties in their extravagant homes. Their lives were filled with opportunities, while his remained shattered and hollow. With every sighting, his anger deepened, and the ache of injustice burned hotter within him. It became clear that their remorse had been nothing more than a performance, carefully crafted for the courtroom. They had moved on, unburdened by guilt or consequence. Henry knew it was time to act. He had spent years preparing for this moment, and he would not let it slip away. His first step was securing a base of operations, an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. The dilapidated building blended perfectly with its surroundings, overlooked and ignored by the world around it. He spent weeks renovating it in secret, soundproofing the walls, installing locks, and setting up hidden compartments to store his carefully curated arsenal of tools and supplies. Every corner of the house was designed with precision, ensuring that no sound would escape and no trace of his actions would ever be discovered. To get closer to his targets, Henry assumed a new identity. He meticulously crafted a persona of a successful businessman from Atlanta, recently relocated to Memphis to expand his investments in charitable initiatives. Through carefully planned interactions and strategically attended events, he began to weave his way into their social circles. He donated to community projects, sponsored youth programs, and engaged with influential figures in the city. His polished demeanor, wealth, and supposed interest in philanthropy made him an attractive figure in elite gatherings, where Justin, Mark, and Kevin frequented. Gradually, Henry became a familiar face at charity events and fundraisers, casually crossing paths with the three men who had taken everything from him. He watched their habits, studied their routines, and listened to their conversations with practiced patience. He observed how they interacted with their friends, their colleagues, and the women in their lives. With each encounter, he reinforced his false persona, presenting himself as a kind-hearted and approachable man with no connection to their past. As his presence in their world solidified, Henry strategically positioned himself as a potential business partner and advisor, offering insights into community development projects and financial investments. He carefully planted the seeds of trust, ensuring that his targets saw him as an asset rather than a threat. With every handshake and every exchange of pleasantries, he felt himself drawing closer to his ultimate goal. His efforts went unnoticed by those around him. To the outside world, he was just another generous benefactor, eager to make a difference. His charm and calculated charisma allowed him to slip into their lives seamlessly, undetected and unsuspected. Meanwhile, he continued his preparations behind the scenes, fine-tuning every aspect of his plan with relentless precision. Henry understood the importance of patience. He knew he had to move slowly, to let his targets become comfortable in his presence. They needed to believe they were safe, that their past crimes were buried forever. Only then, when they were at their most vulnerable, would he strike. Justin Carter was the first target. Henry had spent weeks observing his routines, tracking his movements with unwavering patience. Each morning, Justin followed the same pattern, waking early, driving his black SUV to a local gym, and working out alone before heading to his office. The gym was located in a quiet commercial area, with minimal foot traffic during the early hours. Henry carefully studied the surroundings, identifying potential blind spots and escape routes. He mapped out the nearby streets, ensuring he could execute his plan without drawing attention. The abandoned parking lot adjacent to the gym became his chosen site. It was rarely used, overgrown with weeds, and partially hidden from the main road. Surveillance cameras in the area were outdated and barely functional, making it the perfect location for an ambush. In the weeks leading up to the attack, Henry rehearsed the timing, ensuring every detail was precise. He knew exactly when Justin would exit the gym, the precise moment to strike, and how much time he would have before anyone noticed his absence. On the morning of the planned execution, Henry arrived at the parking lot before dawn. Dressed in dark, inconspicuous clothing, he parked his unmarked van in a shadowy corner and waited. He watched as Justin finished his workout and walked out, casually checking his phone and heading toward his car. With calculated precision, Henry moved swiftly, striking Justin with a high-voltage stun gun before he could react. The electric jolt sent him collapsing onto the pavement, his body convulsing before going limp. Without hesitation, Henry lifted him into the van, ensuring the gym's security cameras would only capture fleeting, indistinct movements. Once inside the van, Henry secured Justin with heavy-duty restraints, binding his wrists and ankles to prevent any possibility of escape. The drive to the secluded house was uneventful. Henry had carefully chosen routes with minimal traffic, avoiding major intersections and areas with active surveillance. He maintained a calm demeanor, his mind focused on the task ahead. Upon arrival at the abandoned house, Henry dragged Justin inside and secured him to a chair in the center of the dimly lit room. The space was carefully arranged, walls lined with soundproofing material, the floor covered with a thick plastic sheet, and a single lamp casting harsh light over the scene. Photographs of Ashley were strategically placed around the room, images of her smiling, full of life, and then the haunting images from the crime scene reports. Henry wanted Justin to see the face of the girl whose life he had destroyed. As Justin slowly regained consciousness, confusion and fear contorted his features. Henry stood silently, watching him struggle against the restraints, his breathing ragged and panicked. There was no room for mercy in Henry's heart. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, and now, standing face to face with the man who had stolen his daughter's future, his resolve was absolute. Without hesitation, Henry prepared the lethal injection. Over the years, he had studied various toxins, searching for one that would mimic a natural heart attack. The experimental compound he had procured induced cardiac arrest within minutes, leaving no traceable evidence during a routine autopsy. As the needle punctured Justin's vein, Henry observed the fear in his eyes, the realization dawning too late. Within minutes, Justin's body went still, his chest rising and falling one last time before life slipped away. Henry meticulously wiped down the scene, removing any trace of his presence. He transported Justin's lifeless body back to his apartment, carefully positioning him on his bed, making it appear as if he had simply passed away in his sleep. Prescription pill bottles were placed strategically on the nightstand, and the room was left undisturbed to suggest natural causes. When Justin's body was discovered later that day, the authorities found no signs of foul play. The medical examiner's report cited sudden cardiac arrest, likely exacerbated by years of steroid use and an undiagnosed heart condition. His wealthy family, eager to avoid scandal, moved swiftly to suppress any further investigation. The police, accustomed to covering up the mistakes of the elite, closed the case without question. Henry watched the news coverage from a distance, his expression devoid of satisfaction or remorse. The first step in his plan had been executed flawlessly. There were no suspicions, no loose ends. He knew that the real justice, the justice denied to Ashley, had finally begun. Mark Henderson was the next target. Unlike Justin, Mark had chosen a quieter life after his release, opting to work at his father's construction company. Henry observed him from a distance, carefully monitoring his routines and daily habits. Mark's work schedule was predictable, with long hours spent managing on-site operations at various construction projects across Memphis. He arrived early in the mornings and often stayed late into the evenings, overseeing tasks and ensuring that deadlines were met. Henry knew that construction sites were inherently dangerous places, and with the right planning, Mark's death could be made to look like a tragic accident. Henry spent weeks studying the site where Mark was assigned. He visited under the guise of a contractor looking for employment, carefully noting the layout, the equipment, and the structural weaknesses. He paid close attention to the scaffolding that Mark frequently used, identifying its vulnerabilities and planning the perfect opportunity to strike. Each observation reinforced his understanding of the environment and provided him with the precise knowledge needed to manipulate it to his advantage. Late one evening, under the cover of darkness, Henry infiltrated the construction site. The security measures were lax, with a single night guard who rarely left his post at the front entrance. Avoiding detection, Henry made his way to the scaffolding structure where Mark typically worked. He loosened critical bolts and weakened key support joints, ensuring that the structure would hold under light pressure but would inevitably fail under significant weight. Every move was calculated, every detail meticulously planned to guarantee that when the time came, it would appear as nothing more than a tragic workplace accident. Days passed before the opportunity presented itself. On a particularly busy afternoon, Mark climbed the scaffolding to oversee a delivery of materials. The weakened structure gave way under his weight, collapsing in an instant and sending him plummeting to the ground below. The fall was catastrophic, and emergency responders pronounced him dead at the scene. His colleagues were in shock, attributing the accident to faulty equipment and the inherent dangers of construction work. The investigation into the incident was brief. Inspectors cited a failure in the scaffolding's structural integrity, blaming improper maintenance and wear over time. The company, eager to avoid liability, quickly settled with Mark's family and moved forward without delving deeper into the cause. The site's security cameras, which could have captured any suspicious activity, had been conveniently offline due to a reported technical issue, an issue carefully orchestrated by Henry days before the incident. With Mark gone, only Kevin Lee remained. Unlike the others, Kevin was more cautious. Following his release, he relocated to a different city, putting distance between himself and his past. He rarely appeared in public and kept a low profile, as though expecting retribution for his crimes. Henry, however, was relentless. He tracked Kevin's movements, using his network of contacts and surveillance skills to map out his new life. Through persistent effort, he discovered that Kevin had developed a habit of frequenting upscale nightclubs, indulging in excessive drinking and reckless behavior. The nightlife provided an ideal opportunity, crowded, chaotic, and full of distractions. Henry traveled to Kevin's new city, blending seamlessly into the urban landscape. He observed Kevin's routine, noting how he arrived late at night, drank heavily, and left alone in the early morning hours. It was during these moments of vulnerability that Henry planned to strike. One night, after watching Kevin down several drinks at an exclusive lounge, Henry approached the bar under the guise of an ordinary patron. With practiced ease, he slipped a powerful mixture of narcotics into Kevin's drink, an expertly calculated blend designed to mimic a lethal overdose without raising suspicion. Kevin, unaware of the danger, consumed the drink and continued his night as usual. As the effects took hold, he became increasingly disoriented, stumbling as he attempted to leave the club. Henry discreetly followed him outside, watching as Kevin struggled to unlock his car. Seizing the moment, Henry assisted him, feigning concern, and ensured Kevin was safely seated inside. He then subtly positioned him in a way that suggested he had passed out from intoxication before leaving the scene unnoticed. Hours later, Kevin's lifeless body was discovered slumped behind the wheel of his car, parked on a quiet side street. The initial assessment pointed to an overdose, a tragic but unsurprising end for a man with a known history of substance abuse. The toxicology report confirmed a fatal combination of alcohol and narcotics, with no indication of foul play. The authorities quickly ruled it as another unfortunate case of self-destructive behavior, closing the case without further investigation. Henry watched the news coverage of Kevin's death with the same cold detachment he had maintained throughout his pursuit. Each step had been executed with precision, leaving no trace, no suspicion, and no loose ends. The final piece of his plan had fallen into place, and for the first time in years, he felt a semblance of peace. Justice, in his eyes, had been served. Detective Alex Johnson had been working in the Memphis Homicide Division for over 2 decades, and experience had taught him to recognize patterns that others overlooked. When the deaths of Justin Carter, Mark Henderson, and Kevin Lee were reported within months of each other, they initially seemed like isolated incidents: an unfortunate overdose, a tragic construction accident, and an unexpected heart attack. But something about the circumstances nagged at him. The timing, the backgrounds of the victims, and the eerie sense that these deaths were not mere coincidences pushed him to dig deeper. Reviewing the case files late one evening, Johnson found the connection he had been searching for. Each of the deceased men had been convicted years earlier in the same high-profile case, the assault and murder of Ashley Williams. Though the case had faded from public memory, Johnson vividly recalled the outrage that followed their lenient sentences. He pulled the original court records, cross-referencing them with recent surveillance footage from their funerals. A single figure stood out in every frame, lingering in the background: Pastor Henry Williams. Intrigued, Johnson began piecing together the puzzle. He obtained financial records and travel logs for Henry, finding several irregularities. The pastor had quietly liquidated assets over the years, making small but consistent withdrawals that didn't match his modest lifestyle. Hotel bookings, rental cars, and surveillance equipment purchases raised further suspicions. Johnson compared these records with the victims' movements and found unsettling overlaps. Henry had been in the same cities at the same times as each of the 3 men before their deaths. As Johnson's investigation deepened, the evidence against Henry mounted. Traffic camera footage placed his vehicle near the scene of Mark Henderson's accident just days before it occurred. Purchases of toxic chemicals matched the substances found in Justin Carter's system. Witnesses at Kevin Lee's last known nightclub visit described seeing a man matching Henry's description watching from a distance. Johnson knew he was closing in, but he needed more concrete proof to bring him in. Henry, sensing the inevitable, took matters into his own hands. Before the police could formally arrest him, he walked into the precinct on a cold February morning, carrying a leather-bound journal. Without hesitation, he placed it on Johnson's desk and sat down, his expression calm and resolute. The journal contained meticulous details of his actions, dates, methods, even his thoughts in the years leading up to his carefully orchestrated revenge. Page after page outlined his calculated pursuit of justice, from his years of planning to the execution of each step. During questioning, Henry remained composed. He neither denied nor justified his actions. Instead, he simply recounted them with unwavering conviction. He refused legal representation, declining to mount any defense. In the courtroom, he stood before the judge, prosecutors, and spectators with a quiet dignity. When given the opportunity to speak, he uttered only one sentence: he had done what the justice system had failed to do. He had avenged his daughter. On March 1, 2024, the court found Henry Williams guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. The sentence was severe: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The courtroom remained silent as the judge delivered the verdict, but outside, public opinion was deeply divided. Some viewed Henry as a man consumed by grief, driven to madness by the failure of the system. Others saw him as a hero, a grieving father who had taken justice into his own hands when the courts had let him down. In the days following the trial, Henry's story spread across media outlets and social circles. His face appeared on news segments, talk shows, and social media platforms. Some condemned his actions as vigilante justice, while others sympathized with the depth of his pain and the righteousness of his cause. The tragedy of his daughter's murder resurfaced, reigniting discussions about the flaws within the judicial system and the privilege that had shielded her killers for so long. Within his church community, Henry became a martyr of sorts. Many of his former congregants believed that he had fulfilled God's will in the only way he knew how. They whispered his name in reverence, sharing his story in hushed voices as a lesson about justice and the limits of human patience. The church where he had once preached love and forgiveness now held his name in bittersweet memory, a symbol of the cost of seeking justice when the world refused to deliver it. Henry himself accepted his fate without regret. In the solitude of his prison cell, he found solace in the belief that he had honored his daughter's memory. He spent his days in quiet reflection, no longer a pastor, no longer a father, just a man who had carried out what he saw as divine justice. Though he had lost his freedom, he had reclaimed something far more valuable in his eyes, his daughter's dignity, her worth, and the justice she had been denied. In the end, Henry Williams had paid the ultimate price for his vengeance. His story became a cautionary tale, a legend that blurred the lines between justice and revenge. And though he would spend the rest of his days behind bars, he carried within him a quiet certainty: he had done what needed to be done.